On Friday evening, just 3 days ago, I walked into Toby's Bar and Grill around 7:30 p.m. I was exhausted after 2 days in the Big Apple, where I had been finalizing negotiations with a major international bank. Earlier in the day, I was feeling pessimistic and didn't believe we would ever reach an agreement. But shortly after the Friday meeting began, all the obstacles started falling like dominoes. By noon, there were only 2 points of contention left. We decided to take a break and go to lunch together. I found a Jewish deli nearby and ordered a huge pastrami and Swiss cheese sandwich on rye bread and enjoyed every bite. When we gathered at 1:30 p.m., George Willis, the lead negotiator from the bank, said, "We've made tremendous progress. I suggest we compromise on the last 2 points." George passed me the document across the table and I read his proposal. It was definitely not a compromise, but it was enough for me and my partners to sign this important contract. I initialed the document and George said he would email me the official contract on Monday. We shook hands and went our separate ways. I returned to the hotel, packed my things, and checked out. I considered staying in town for the night because my fiancée, Trish, was away for the weekend with her 2 older sisters. They were staying at one of the huge Indian casinos in Connecticut. They planned to spend their days at the pool and spa and their evenings at the best bars and restaurants. Instead of spending another night away from home, I headed to Grand Central Station and took the Metro North train to New Haven. By 7:30, I was on I-91 heading toward Hartford and exited the highway. I drove through the always busy downtown area of West Hartford. I decided to stop for dinner. I was sitting at Toby's Bar when I noticed my 2 future brides sitting at a horseshoe-shaped table through the mirror. Their husbands were sitting next to them. An instant pain in my stomach and a feeling that it was spreading throughout my body told me that my wedding plans, which were supposed to come to fruition in exactly 8 weeks, were in jeopardy. My sisters-in-law were supposed to be at the casino with Trish. Catching the bartender's eye, I said to Michael, "I need to step outside for a minute. I promise I'll be right back." "No problem, Chris." "Can I put your glass on the shelf and clear the table?" Michael asked, reaching for my glass. I nodded in agreement and left Toby's. I got into my car in the back of the parking lot and sketched out a plan in my head. I called Trish and she answered, "Hi, sweetie. How's the big city?" "Same as always. We finished the negotiations successfully, and I'm about to have dinner. I wish you were here." "You're so sweet, Chris. I miss you, too. We had a great day. We lay by the pool and had cocktails. I'm already starting to tan for the wedding. I'm meeting my sisters for dinner in a few minutes." Trish and I talked a little more, exchanged declarations of love, and ended the conversation. I launched the Find My Phone app and entered Trish's information. I didn't know where she was, but her phone was in Falmouth, Massachusetts, on the western tip of Cape Cod. Damn, I thought. Trish's longtime neighbor and friend, Nick Flaherty, had a family home in Falmouth. We had been invited there several times. Scrolling through my contacts, I found Sue Flaherty's cell phone number. I called, and when Sue answered, I said, "Hi, Sue. It's Chris Harrington." "Chris? Chris Harrington? What a nice surprise. How are the wedding preparations going? Nick and I can't wait to be there." I replied, "To be honest, I don't know how the preparations are going." Sue laughed and said, "Typical male response." "Sue," I asked, "is there any chance Nick is going away for the weekend?" "That's a strange question. Nick hardly ever goes away for the weekend, but he is this time." "What's going on?" Sue asked, with a slight note of concern in her voice. "Before I answer, let me ask you something. Do you have the Find My Phone app on your phone?" Sue sighed involuntarily and replied in a whisper, "Not that again." A minute later, she continued, "He should be in Philadelphia, but the tracker says he's at his parents' house." With a sad sigh, I said, "I'm so sorry, Sue. Nick and Trish are together." Sue cried quietly for a few minutes. "This isn't the first time," she admitted. "I'm going to call that bastard and tell him not to come home." Can I ask you a favor, Sue? When she didn't answer, I continued. Trish won't be home until Sunday afternoon. Neither will Nick. I asked, let's put off the fight until tomorrow night. In the meantime, I'll go change the locks on my apartment and withdraw half of the wedding money from our joint account. I can pack all of her things and leave the bags on the driveway. You're right, Chris. I'll do the same. If you need to talk, call or text me. I'm sorry I called. Sue started crying again and said through her sobs, It's not your fault, Chris. My last call was to Billy Jones, a friend and neighbor. He answered, What's going on, Topher? I need help, Billy. Are you free tomorrow morning? I was planning on sleeping in, but Sally will wake me up at 7 o'clock. How can I help? Can you change the locks on the front door and the garage door? And if you can change the code on the garage door, I'd really appreciate it. There was a pause, and then Billy said, Damn it! Is the wedding off? If I'm not missing anything, Trish and I are dead and buried. I understand, Topher. First thing in the morning, I'll go to Lowe's and get everything changed by the end of the day. Is that okay with you? Sure, Billy. Thanks. Feeling 20 years older, I returned to Toby's and headed for the bar. I watched my brides and their husbands in the mirror while Michael poured me a bourbon. The waiter cleared the appetizers from their tables. I grabbed a bar stool, glass in hand, and headed for the table where my former future family was sitting. Michael shouted, Hey, Chris! Can't you sit on a chair? My furious glare silenced Michael. When I threw the chair to the end of the table, climbed on top of it, and stared at Julie and Karen, the atmosphere quickly cooled. Chris, buddy, come sit in the booth. We'll bring you the menu, said Steve, Karen's husband. Without taking my eyes off the women, I replied, No, thanks, Steve. I won't be long. I continued to stare silently at Julie and Karen until Julie's husband, Roy, asked, What's going on, Chris? Ask your wife, Roy. Roy and Steve turned to their wives. It was easy to see that both women were scared to death. What's going on? Steve asked the sisters. Karen spoke first. It's not what you think, Chris. The tension grew as I stared across the table at Karen. I think it's exactly what I think it is, I said to everyone. Steve and Roy looked back and forth between their wives at one end of the table and me at the other. When tears began to stream down Karen's face, Steve asked, What's going on, Chris? Your wives are covering for Trish. Last Tuesday, they were all in my kitchen. Since I was out of town until Sunday, they were going to spend the weekend in Foxwoods. Where's Trish? Roy asked the sisters. When they didn't answer, he turned and looked at me. She's at Nick's house on Cape Cod. Is that true? Steve hissed. Both women were crying. Karen nodded in agreement. Julie sobbed, Trish loves you, Chris. She really does. Steve rolled his eyes and Roy stared at the table. She has a great way of showing her love. She and her sisters lie to me and she runs off for the weekend with an old neighbor she's in love with to have sex just 8 weeks before our wedding. Your sister is a piece of shit. Don't you dare. Roy interrupted his wife and said, Shut up, Julie. Turning to me, he asked, What are you going to do? I'm calling off the wedding. Both friends leaned back on the couch. Their wives cried even harder. Dad spent so much money on the wedding and reception, Karen said. I don't care. I'm not marrying a lying, two-faced girl like Trish. I waited a few seconds before saying to everyone, I told Sue Flaherty that Nick is cheating on her with Trish. We both need 24 hours to break them up. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me as I asked Roy and Steve, I need your help. Can you make sure... I nodded toward their wives. Can you make sure they don't contact Trish until 6:15 p.m. tomorrow evening? Both women started to protest, but Steve said, Sure we can, buddy. Then, turning to his wife, he said, You disgust me. I wonder if your sisters ever covered for you when you cheated on me. Karen froze, and Steve continued, If you or Julie contact Trish in any way, I will consider filing for divorce. Roy flushed with anger. His response elicited a sad moan from Julie as he said, "After all the problems we've had in our 3rd year of marriage, I can still file for divorce. But understand, I will definitely do so if you contact Trish." I shook both men's hands and left the restaurant. Saturday was tense. It took me several hours to remove the last traces of Trish from our home. Instead of stacking full bags of trash on the driveway, I rented a small storage unit and my neighbor Billy lent me his pickup truck. It only took me 3 trips to get all the bags off my property. The hardest part of the day was writing the letter to our wedding guests. I worked on it little by little throughout the day. It read, Subject: Wedding news from the Harrington and Clark families. Dear friends, I am in the middle of a wonderful weekend, just 8 weeks before my wedding to Trish Clark. The weekend has been wonderful because I discovered that Trish spent it in bed with another man. Trish and her longtime neighbor Nick Flaherty lied to me and Nick's wife, Sue. With the help of Trish's sisters, Karen and Julie, and their lies, this couple is spending the weekend together on Cape Cod. You may be wondering why I am surprised by such terrible behavior. The reason is simple. I am not married to Trish. It is much easier to call off a wedding than to go through the agony of a divorce. This letter is official notice of the cancellation of my wedding to Trish Clark. Sincerely, Christopher Harrington. On Saturday at 5:30 p.m., I called Sue Flaherty. We told each other what we had done so far. Since Sue was married, her divorce from Nick would be much more complicated. On Saturday morning, she spoke with a lawyer and arranged a meeting for Monday morning. The lawyer recommended canceling joint credit cards and, if possible, separating family finances. This was typical legal advice in a divorce case. We ended our conversation a few minutes before 6 o'clock and agreed to send our spouses text messages at exactly 6 o'clock. My message was simple. Hope you're having a nice weekend with Nick. Thanks for showing me and the world that you're a liar, a cheater, and a slut. Our wedding is off. I sent the message at exactly 6 o'clock. A moment later, I sent an email to our family and guests. 16 months later, I was standing at the altar. My best man and friends stood to my left. The bridesmaids and groomsmen walked down the center aisle of the church, all looking stunning. Tears filled my eyes as I looked to the back of the church. Trish's father stood in a black tuxedo, proud of his daughter. His eyes, like those of all the guests, were fixed on the most beautiful bride in the world. Her blonde hair was styled and looked beautiful under a small white veil. Her blue eyes sparkled and were full of love, and her dark red lips made me think of our upcoming wedding night. Her form-fitting white wedding dress accentuated her divine figure without making her look vulgar. It was perfect. When Mr. Clark and my bride began to walk down the aisle toward me, I felt someone staring at me intensely. I looked back at the guests sitting on my side of the church, then glanced toward the bride. And then I saw Trish. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. I saw her whisper, "I'm sorry," before turning to her father and younger sister, who were walking toward me.